I brought my bank card back to 12 years ago. Before Beijing implemented its housing purchase restriction policy, I frantically bought houses and even got involved with my then early-20s wealthy boyfriend. I drained my savings to buy 2 properties, while he relied on his father to buy 8. Wouldn't life just be smooth sailing from then on? On the day we were set to move into our new home, filled with joy, I suddenly found myself back 12 years in the past again. I was standing in a real estate sales center in Beijing, staring at a flyer in front of me that clearly read, Hua Ting Residential Complex, 15,800 RMB per square meter. I stood there, stunned, for a long time before abruptly turning to look at my mother. She looked so young. Mom. My voice trembled. What year is it now? My mother, who was talking to a sales agent, shot me a glare. It's 2010. What else could it be? 2010. In my previous life, during the summer of 2010, my parents had traveled from our hometown to Beijing to look at houses with me. I had just graduated from university a year earlier, full of youthful arrogance. I didn't want to drain my family's savings just to buy a 1-bedroom apartment in Beijing, so I stubbornly refused. I kept delaying until after the Lunar New Year, when Beijing introduced the housing purchase restriction policy, and I no longer qualified to buy. After that, housing prices in Beijing skyrocketed. In the end, my boyfriend and I had to save every penny for years, pooling money from both sets of parents just to scrape together a down payment for an apartment outside the 5th Ring Road. But on the very day we were supposed to sign the contract, the elevator broke down. When I came to, I was back 12 years in the past. Snapping out of my daze, I stood up, pulled my bank card out of my bag, my heart pounding with excitement. The day I traveled back in time was the same day we were supposed to sign the contract. To cover the down payment and agency fees, I had prepared my bank card in advance. In the account was over 2 million RMB that we had painstakingly saved up. I took a deep breath. If I remembered correctly, this card was issued in 2015. In 2010, it shouldn't even exist. Yet here it was, in my bag, having traveled back in time with me. Without time to explain to my parents, I gripped the bank card tightly and rushed out of the real estate sales center. I found the nearest bank. Account balance, 2.03 million RMB. With the current housing prices, I could buy a 3-bedroom apartment, 120 square meters, and pay for it in full with cash. Taking a deep breath, I clutched the card and ran straight back to the sales center. I ran the entire way, gasping for breath, my chest feeling like it might explode, but I didn't feel tired at all. On the contrary, I was so excited that my whole body trembled. Before I even stepped inside, I saw the young saleswoman glance at my parents with a look of disdain. "Are you two buying or not?" "Of course we're buying," my mother hurriedly replied with a placating smile, pulling out her phone, probably to call me. The saleswoman, not seeing me, kept staring at my mother with a mocking tone. "Auntie, don't say I didn't warn you. If you want to buy, you'd better sign the contract soon. This project is in high demand. Wait too long, and there won't be any units left." Lowering her voice, she muttered, "Taking a loan just to buy a 1-bedroom apartment and still dilly-dallying like this. If you can't afford it, go look somewhere else." Her last sentence wasn't loud, but it was enough for my parents to hear. Naturally, I heard it too. My mother's smile froze on her face, and my father's expression darkened. Before my mother could respond, I strode forward. "We're buying! Who said we're not buying?" I shot the saleswoman a cold look. Not only are we buying, but we're getting a 3-bedroom unit and paying in full with cash. With that, I pointed to the most beautifully designed unit on the flyer. If I remembered correctly, this complex would later become part of a school district, with a new subway line built nearby. The prices would soar, making this a guaranteed smart investment. My mother quickly grabbed my arm. "Have you lost your mind?" "No," I said, winking at her. "Our family has money now." Turning to the saleswoman, I watched as her eyes lit up at the mention of buying a 3-bedroom unit outright. She immediately plastered on a smile and eagerly led me to sign the contract. "Wait," I called out, smiling politely. "I do want to buy, but not through you." Her smile faltered. I glanced around and spotted a male sales agent nearby. I waved him over, signaling him to approach. As he got closer, I noticed he looked very young, like he had just graduated from university. "We'll take this unit, paid in full," I said, pointing to the 3-bedroom apartment on the flyer. "Let's go sign the contract." The young man froze for a couple of seconds before quickly leading us to the contract signing area. Throughout the process, he was polite and attentive. When it came time to swipe the card, I was actually nervous to death. After all, this was a bank card from 12 years in the future. But thankfully, the transaction went through, deducting 92 million RMB. I had bought a house in Beijing, paid in full with cash. After completing the payment and returning home, I still felt like I was dreaming. Once I closed the door, my parents started interrogating me. My mother was so worried she almost cried. A girl who had just graduated a year ago, suddenly having 2 million RMB in her hands, had I done something shady? I couldn't help but laugh and cry at the same time, but I also couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation. I could only try saying that I had won the lottery and gotten 2 million RMB. Fortunately, my parents were simple and trusting people, and they actually believed me. Having narrowly passed that hurdle, I breathed a sigh of relief, but once I calmed down, I started to feel a bit regretful. Although I now owned a house in Beijing, why the heck had I paid for it in full just to save face? Wouldn't it have been better to take a loan and buy 2 properties? After pacing around the room, I eventually gave up on that thought. With my current income, even if I took a loan to buy 2 properties, I wouldn't be able to afford the monthly payments. Besides, the purchase was already done. Regretting it now wouldn't change anything. I should focus on finding ways to earn more money before the housing restriction policy took effect and buy a few more properties. Time travel is a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity. If I only bought 1 house, it would truly be a waste. People like Xia Luo, who traveled back to their youth, became superstars. Even if I didn't have any special talents, I should at least buy a few more houses and wait for their value to skyrocket. Imagining myself owning multiple properties in Beijing, living off the rent each day as a wealthy landlord, and thinking back to my previous life where I had to rent in Beijing, enduring countless bitter moments when the landlord raised the rent, just the thought of it felt exhilarating. But the bank card that had traveled back with me was nearly drained, and I had just graduated, without even a stable job. My parents back in our hometown were just ordinary workers. They had to borrow money from everywhere just to try to buy me a 1-bedroom apartment before. If I tried borrowing from relatives or friends, first of all, I didn't know anyone rich enough to lend me that much money. And secondly, who would believe me when I said that a year from now, Beijing would implement housing restrictions and prices would soar? Feeling dejected, I suddenly remembered that on the day the elevator broke down, my boyfriend, Lu Zhao, was also inside. If I had traveled back in time, could he have as well? 2 people working together to make money would surely be easier than me struggling alone. So the next morning, I dressed up neatly and headed to Renmin University. In 2010, Lu Zhao was still a student there, and we hadn't yet met. I only knew he was a 3rd-year finance major, but I didn't know which class he was in. Knowing he liked playing basketball, I decided to try my luck at the basketball court. At the court, I immediately spotted that familiar figure. He didn't seem very sociable. While the others played in groups, he was alone, practicing shots at the hoop. Even so, he attracted countless glances from the girls around him. I watched him from a distance. Lu Zhao from 12 years ago. He looked so youthful. 12 years ago, Lu Zhao was a 3rd-year university student, full of youthful vigor. On the court, the young man in a white t-shirt dashed around, each movement brimming with the energy of youth. Under the bright sunlight, his face was so handsome it was almost unbelievable. I stared at him, entranced. In my previous life, when I met Lu Zhao, he had already graduated for 3 years. He had experienced the harshness of society, his sharp edges dulled, and the spirited air of his teenage years had faded. I had always wondered what Lu Zhao was like during his university days. So this was it, more radiant than I had ever imagined. What a pity that, right now, he wasn't mine yet. After watching for a while, I boldly approached a girl standing nearby, pointed at Lu Zhao and whispered, "Hey, has that Lu Zhao guy got a girlfriend yet?" The girl's eyes widened in surprise. Of course not. Don't you know? According to her, Lu Zhao was the heartthrob of the finance department, a genuine rich second-generation kid. The number of girls chasing him could form a line stretching to the city walls, but no one had ever heard of him having a girlfriend. I smirked. Good, he really kept himself pure, didn't he? But a rich second-generation kid? Was this really the same boyfriend I had in my previous life? In my previous life, Lu Zhao clearly came from an ordinary family. His parents ran a small diner. Both our families had to scrimp and save for years to gather the 2 million RMB down payment for a house. How could he be a rich second-generation kid now? Before I could think too deeply, Lu Zhao made a 3-point shot, instantly earning cheers from the crowd. A blushing girl ran over to offer him a bottle of water, but he declined. I looked down at my hands. I had rushed over here and only brought a bottle of mineral water, which I had already opened and taken a sip from. Channeling the confidence of a rightful girlfriend, I walked over with a half-drunk bottle and tossed it into Lu Zhao's arms. Thirsty, right? Drink this. Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd around us. I felt a little smug, childish maybe, but look at this. The heartthrob of all these girls had, in my previous life, even eaten leftovers I didn't finish. But Lu Zhao lowered his head, looked at the bottle in his hands, frowned, and threw it right back at me. Lady, this trick won't work on me. Keep pretending. Go on. Keep pretending. Don't you recognize me? I asked. He nodded, his expression utterly confused. I raised an eyebrow, catching his slip. Then how do you know I'm older than you? Lu Zhao hesitated for a moment before replying honestly. Maybe because you look older? I nearly spat blood in anger. I looked older? In my previous life, Lu Zhao never said anything like that in bed. Back then, he would hold my waist, whisper in my ear, "Your skin is so beautiful." Men's words really couldn't be trusted. I took a deep breath, consoling myself. Fine, he's my future husband anyway. Let's just say he spoke thoughtlessly. Stepping closer to Lu Zhao, I lowered my voice and asked, "I heard them say you're a rich second-generation kid. So, are you planning to buy a house?" Lu Zhao stared at me for a long moment, his handsome brows furrowing and then relaxing. Finally, he gave a small smile. "So, you're a real estate agent?" Well, I hesitated for a second before nodding. "Yes. I know a few properties that are guaranteed to increase in value. I can assure you, 10 years from now, your assets will double." Even though I didn't know why Lu Zhao had suddenly become a rich second-generation kid after I traveled back, luring him into buying a house was the right move. Think about it. 10 years from now, if Lu Zhao had 9 properties and we combined ours, we'd have 10. Wouldn't life be perfect? Seeing that he seemed interested, I quickly pitched a few complexes that I knew would skyrocket in value 12 years from now. After listening, Lu Zhao waved me closer. I immediately leaned in, listening as he whispered in my ear, "Not buying." It turned out that the university-aged Lu Zhao was this hard to deal with. I pestered Lu Zhao for the entire afternoon. I told him I was his future girlfriend, and he replied that he'd better protect his eyesight now so he wouldn't end up with such poor taste later. I told him I knew complexes with beautiful environments and great potential for appreciation, and he said his family's villa was as beautiful as a painting, that he was still a student, and investments weren't his responsibility. His tongue was sharper than mine. Nothing like the mature, steady, and gentle Lu Zhao from 12 years later. I even started to wonder if the soul of the delivery guy in the elevator that day had possessed him. Unable to make any progress with Lu Zhao, I had to shift my focus elsewhere. Thinking back to the struggles of my previous life when I refused to rely on my parents and didn't want to drain their savings to buy a house, my father had said, "If you don't rely on us now, when housing prices spiral out of control, you'll have to depend on us even more." So, as soon as I got home, I started convincing my parents to sell our old house in our hometown and buy a property in Beijing. My parents were already retired and had planned to move to Beijing to live with me, but that old house held years of memories for them, and they were reluctant to sell. In my previous life, by 2022, the price per square meter in Beijing had risen by tens of thousands of RMB, while the value of our old house in our hometown had barely increased by 100,000 RMB. My parents regretted it so much they nearly turned green with frustration. Given a second chance at life, I naturally had to change the situation and find a way to get rich. So I immediately booked a flight back to our hometown to sell the house. That night, I spent hours persuading my parents, analyzing macroeconomics, predicting future development, and even mentioning which areas in Beijing would soon have new subway stations. My mother listened in a daze, but because she wanted to sleep, she gritted her teeth and agreed to sell. The next evening, the three of us were at the airport in our hometown. My uncle came to pick us up, but when he heard we mutual funds, the wife sitting in the passenger seat sneered and mocked us immediately. "Sis, you're really listening to Yan Yan? She's just a kid. What does she know? Think about it, selling a 3-bedroom house in our hometown to go to Beijing, where you can only afford a tiny 2-bedroom with the down payment. You can live in something so cramped? And Yan Yan, you graduated from university but still act so recklessly. All those years of studying and you didn't learn a thing." My mother's face showed a hint of embarrassment. I glanced at my aunt, then smirked. "You're right. My stomach isn't big enough to hold much knowledge. Not like yours, Auntie. 3 abortions in 2 years. You've really made Uncle proud." From my angle, I could see her face turn green. To ease the tension, my mother scolded me, and the matter was dropped. Selling the house went smoothly. Though the house was old, it was in a school district near the city's key high school, in a great location with good transportation. My mother had always kept it spotless, so it was in excellent condition. A family came to see it once, loved it immediately, and bought it without much haggling. With the large sum from selling the house, plus the down payment my parents had originally saved for a 1-bedroom apartment for me, I returned to Beijing with them. At a sales center for a complex that would later become a famous school district with skyrocketing prices, I confidently signed a contract for a 2-bedroom apartment. The money I had was just enough for the down payment. Stepping out of the sales center, I breathed a sigh of relief. Now, I was a small-time landlord with 2 properties in Beijing. A rough calculation told me that, 12 years from now, the total value of these 2 properties would exceed 10 million RMB. But it still wasn't enough. I counted on my fingers, silently making plans. If I wanted to make the most of the time before the housing restriction policy was enacted to get rich, besides working hard to earn money, the more important thing was to convince people with money to invest in real estate. But why would wealthy people with money to invest trust a young girl like me? I thought again of my future fiancé, Lu Zhao, the rich second-generation kid. I had to win him over before 2011, before Beijing's housing restrictions kicked in, and use his status to get him to buy 8 more properties. Then, when we reached marriageable age, I'd marry him and become a small-time landlord with 10 properties. But the very first step to becoming a landlord was proving difficult. Lu Zhao didn't pay me any attention. After countless failed attempts to get him to look at houses with me, I decided to take a detour, inviting him to watch a movie at a private cinema, then using my feminine charm to win him over and slowly brainwash him about the importance of buying property. But Lu Zhao was incredibly hard to pin down. I brought him food and even helped him fend off a bunch of unwanted admirers. Finally, he reluctantly agreed. So, in a private cinema room, I picked a romantic movie, preparing for a sweet date with Lu Zhao. But, looking at the youthful face in front of me, I felt increasingly guilty, as if I were cheating. Suddenly, I felt sorry for the Lu Zhao from my previous life. Moreover, the current Lu Zhao was very uncooperative. No matter how close I leaned, he sat as still as a statue, unmoving. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed his hand and placed it on my waist. "Lu Zhao, I think I've gained some weight lately. Check for me." Lu Zhao's hand stiffened. There was hope. But before he could make a move, my phone suddenly rang. I was about to turn it off, but accidentally saw the caller ID, the sales agent for the 2-bedroom apartment I had just bought. Lu Zhao saw it too and smirked. "Your colleague is calling." Ignoring him, I answered the call, but my heart sank because of it. The sales agent said that since I had only recently graduated and didn't have a stable income, my mortgage application had been rejected. It was highly likely the loan wouldn't be approved. I was beside myself with worry, while Lu Zhao casually sat there watching the movie, even munching on melon seeds. My phone had a glitch. Even without the speaker on, the bank employee's voice echoed through the room. I turned to Lu Zhao, setting my sights on him again. I didn't understand why. After being reborn, Lu Zhao's personality had changed so much, even becoming a rich second-generation kid. But precisely because he was a rich second-generation kid, though I didn't know how rich, helping me with a bank loan shouldn't be a problem, right? It should be fine. Zhao Zhao, I said, tossing my phone aside and scooting closer to him. Lu Zhao immediately looked disgusted. He pushed me away, took a sip of water to rinse his mouth, and said nonchalantly, "If you have something to say, just say it, big sister." I ignored the last two words and got straight to the point. "You probably heard, the loan for my house is stuck. Can you help me?" No. I hadn't even finished my sentence before Lu Zhao cut me off. I softened my tone, trying to coax him, but he didn't give me any face, setting down his cup and standing up. "The movie's over, I'm leaving." With that, he actually headed for the door. "Hey!" Panicking, I ran to block his path. "The sales agent said my loan is stuck and probably won't be approved. If the bank doesn't approve it, I won't be able to buy this house. Wouldn't that mean my dream of becoming a small-time landlord would be crushed before it even started?" Lu Zhao listened attentively, then gave me a serious reply. "A sudden breeze ripples the spring lake." Then he left. Just like that. I sat there, a tangled mess, wondering what he meant by that. Feeling anxious, I even looked it up online and found the second half of the phrase, "What does it have to do with you?" In that context, I guessed Lu Zhao was telling me in 4 words, "What's it to me?" Fine, very Lu Zhao. The current Lu Zhao was completely different from the one in my previous life. Back then, he was mature, calm, meticulous, and incredibly gentle. He was always considerate, never spoke harshly, and never turned down any of my requests. But after being reborn, the young Lu Zhao was really hard to deal with. Luckily, thanks to the years I spent with him in my previous life, I still knew him somewhat and could barely grasp a few of his weaknesses. His biggest fear was being clung to relentlessly. So I clung to him like a leech, alternating between soft pleading and persistent pestering, until Lu Zhao finally agreed to help me with the loan. But he had a condition. I felt a bit uneasy. What could a rich second-generation kid possibly need my help with? It definitely wasn't something small, but it turned out to be a small thing after all. In exchange, Lu Zhao wanted me to practice basketball with him. I blinked. "That's it?" "Yeah." Lu Zhao, unusually patient, explained, "When I play basketball, very few people can keep up with my rhythm, so I always practice alone. But that day on the court, your pace and movements felt so familiar, very similar to mine." This was probably the most he'd said to me since we met again. I raised an eyebrow. "So that's why." Of course it felt familiar. In my previous life, he was the one who taught me. With such a simple request, I agreed immediately. 2 days later, Lu Zhao arranged to meet me. As soon as we met, he handed me a stack of printed papers. I took them. "What's this?" "Your bank account statement." I froze, flipping through a few pages. Tsk. As expected of a rich second-generation kid, his methods were impressive. After confirming everything was in order, I handed the statement to the sales agent. A week later, I finally got the news from the agent. The loan had been approved. The weight on my heart finally lifted. I counted on my fingers again. I was now a future multi-millionaire landlord, no matter what. Time to celebrate. So I immediately called Lu Zhao and invited him to dinner. First, to thank him. Second, of course, to get closer to him, win him over quickly, buy more houses, and become a real estate tycoon. Perhaps because we had agreed to practice basketball together, Lu Zhao didn't refuse my invitation this time. But at dinner, I was stunned. I had squeezed onto a crowded bus, covered in dust from the road, and as soon as I got off, I saw Lu Zhao. He was driving a red sports car, pulling up right in front of the restaurant where we were meeting. So ostentatious. I didn't know much about cars, so I looked it up online. A Ferrari, brand new, worth about 2 million RMB. And this was 2 million RMB in 2010, enough to buy an entire house. What a loss! I was so heartbroken I could barely breathe. I had been reborn and was working myself to the bone to buy houses to wait for their value to rise, while my boyfriend casually dropped 2 million on a car? So throughout the meal, I patiently explained to him that cars were depreciating assets, losing value over time, while real estate, especially in the capital, was different. In the future, housing prices would shoot up like a rocket. Lu Zhao didn't say a word until I had talked myself hoarse. Then he leisurely spoke up. So? I nearly fainted, but I patiently guided him step by step. So do you want to sell the car and buy a house? I looked at him eagerly. After lecturing for half the day, even if he didn't buy, he should at least be a little tempted, right? But Lu Zhao casually took a sip of tea, then looked up at me. Say one more word about buying a house, and I'm leaving. Don't go. Don't go. I gritted my teeth and compromised. We won't talk about it while eating. Only then was Lu Zhao satisfied, but he didn't seem to like the food at this restaurant. He kept picking at it, his brows furrowed. In my previous life, Lu Zhao was never a picky eater. Even when I cooked so badly that I turned chicken drumsticks into jerky, he would eat it without complaint. But speaking of which, in my previous life, Lu Zhao's parents only ran a small diner. How the heck did he become a rich second-generation kid after I was reborn? Was it because his family background had changed in this life, or had his family always been rich before I met him, and he just pretended to be poor in front of me? But if he was pretending to be poor, why go so far as to not have enough money to buy a house? I couldn't figure it out. But those things weren't important. What was important was that I calculated the timeline. There were only a few months left before the housing restriction policy would be enacted. Buying a house was urgent, but Lu Zhao was still indifferent, not even allowing me to mention buying a house. I couldn't eat, my heart burning with anxiety. Finally, after we finished eating, I took the initiative to pay, then returned to the table and tried my feminine charm again. I heard the private cinema we went to last time has a new movie. Shall we go watch it? But Lu Zhao refused. Refused! He got straight to the point. Give it up, big sister. You can't handle me. I didn't argue, but I gritted my teeth inwardly. Who says that? In my previous life, I didn't just handle you. I completely won you over. Taking a deep breath, I tried to stay calm, smiling gently. That's because you're still young and don't understand my worth yet. Lu Zhao smiled, but didn't say anything. I asked more, but he couldn't be bothered to respond. My attempt to get closer failed silently, and I finally felt a bit discouraged. In this new life, Lu Zhao, who had been so obedient to me in the past, was now this difficult to deal with. I could only console myself. The path to becoming a small-time landlord couldn't be smooth sailing. So, after resting for a day, I gathered my spirits and went to Lu Zhao's school again. Over the next few days, perhaps because I had pestered him to the point of fear, he finally relented, but with a condition. I had to play basketball with him. For every hour I played with him, he would buy 5 square meters of property. Once I had played enough hours to cover the square footage of a house, he would go with me to the sales center to sign the contract. As expected of a rich second-generation kid, buying a house was as casual as eating or drinking for him. After hearing his condition, I told him to wait a moment, then immediately pulled out my phone to calculate. Housing prices in Beijing 10 years from now, at the lowest estimate, would be 50,000 RMB per square meter. 1 hour of playing equals 5 square meters. That meant 250,000 RMB per hour? I had to play this game. This might be the only chance in my life to earn an hourly wage of 250,000 RMB. So, under the pretext of work, I hid the truth from my parents and went to Lu Zhao's school every day to practice basketball with him. Perhaps because our steps and rhythm matched so well, Lu Zhao was very satisfied with me. I, on the other hand, was full of motivation, because for every hour I practiced with him, I gained 5 square meters of property. After all, Lu Zhao would eventually be mine, and his houses would be mine too. So putting in extra hours to gain more square footage was totally worth it. I threw myself into being his practice partner. Lu Zhao really loved basketball. Even under the scorching sun, he thoroughly enjoyed it. 10 days passed, and I pulled out my little notebook to calculate. The hours I had practiced could be converted into 125 square meters. So, I excitedly dragged Lu Zhao straight to the sales center of our residential complex. If I remembered correctly, this area would become a school district in a few years, and the price growth would be insane. Lu Zhao kept his promise. As soon as we arrived, without batting an eye, he bought a 128 square meter apartment. But just before he signed the contract, I had an idea and convinced him to opt for a bank loan. I had already missed one opportunity. Since his family had money, paying monthly installments wouldn't be a problem. With the same amount of money, if I worked harder at practicing, I could get him to buy 2 more properties. Wouldn't that be better? This apartment was also around 2 million RMB. What if his family later stopped letting him spend money so freely on houses? The contract was signed, and Lu Zhao looked at me with suspicion. He probably couldn't understand why the contract was in his name, yet I was the one hugging it and grinning like an idiot for half the day. Practicing basketball under the sun for days on end had left me noticeably tanner. My mother finally noticed something was off. After dinner that evening, she grabbed my hand, her eyes welling up. "Sweetie, are you unable to find a job and secretly working as a laborer?" My father nodded in agreement. "It's only been half a month. How did you get so tanned?" To be honest, my job wasn't much better than manual labor. But I couldn't tell them the truth, so I made up an excuse, saying that my boss had just started developing a new residential complex, and it was still under construction. As his secretary, I had to follow him to the site every day. Finally, my parents reluctantly believed me. But they didn't know that in just half a month, I had secured a 128 square meter school district apartment for my future self, 10 years from now. What was a little tanning compared to that? But while I was busy practicing with Lu Zhao, an unexpected incident happened. While trying to block him from making a dunk, I accidentally fell and sprained my ankle. My ankle swelled up. Lu Zhao frowned and offered to take me to the infirmary, but I was so distressed about the 5 square meters I had just earned in the last half hour that I gritted my teeth and kept playing. But as soon as I stood up, a sharp pain shot through my ankle, and I couldn't stand steady. I immediately fell straight into Lu Zhao's arms. He panicked, quickly catching me, but his hands landed in a place they shouldn't have. Before I could say anything, he yanked his hands back and dropped me straight onto the ground. "Lu Zhao." I gritted my teeth and called his name. But when I looked up, I saw him staring at me, his eyes full of embarrassment. Looking closer, I noticed his ears were bright red. Tsk. So he was shy? In the end, Lu Zhao did take me to the infirmary. Take might not be the right word. He practically dragged me there. He hoisted me up, strode toward the infirmary, and finally dumped me in front of the doctor. Not leaving me on the court and ignoring me was probably the most kindness he could muster. It wasn't too serious, just a sprained ankle. The doctor told me to apply medicine on time and avoid strenuous activity. I nodded quietly, my heart aching. I couldn't play basketball with Lu Zhao anymore. What a huge loss. 1 hour equals 5 square meters of property. Leaving the infirmary, I still wanted to go back to the court, but Lu Zhao wouldn't let me. He stuffed me into his car and drove me straight home. On the way, I gently tried to coax him, attempting to find another condition for him to agree to buy a house, but he rejected every suggestion. He was a rich second-generation kid with no shortage of money or looks. He didn't need my help with anything. Besides basketball, he didn't seem to have any other hobbies. I was truly disheartened, but I realized I had gotten upset too soon. The next evening, while browsing the university forum, I saw countless rumors about Lu Zhao's love life, and the female lead in those rumors was me. Someone with too much time on their hands had secretly taken a bunch of photos of us playing basketball together. There was even a photo of me falling, with Lu Zhao holding me in his arms. The caption read, "Finance Department heartthrob Lu Zhao falls for a black monkey." Black monkey, your head! I was so angry I nearly exploded and immediately ran to the bathroom to look in the mirror. But I had been out on the court with Lu Zhao every day lately, and I had indeed gotten much tanner. Plus, I'd lost some weight. If we were talking purely about appearance, Black Monkey wasn't entirely undeserved. I felt even more heartbroken. Moreover, the comments were full of attacks, saying I had ulterior motives and was trying to seduce the finance department's heartthrob. They said I was overestimating myself. In short, it was all insults. I sighed, trying to console myself. For the sake of becoming a small-time landlord, I could endure these rumors. But I endured, and someone else stepped up to defend me. It was Lu Zhao. He posted a statement, publicly declaring that we were just friends. But he added, "It wasn't me seducing him, it was him pursuing me." Then he bluntly responded to every comment attacking me. I was completely stunned. Was this still the young Lu Zhao? He was someone who wouldn't blink even if the sky fell. Why had he suddenly taken the initiative to help me today and made such a big deal out of it? Curious, I grabbed my phone and called him in the middle of the night. The phone barely rang once before he picked up. A familiar voice answered, "Hello." But suddenly, I didn't know what to say. He seemed unusually patient today, not rushing me, just quietly waiting for me to speak. After a few seconds of silence, I remembered why I called and asked. That post clarifying things. "Did you write it?" "Yes. You said you were pursuing me just to help you out of a bind." Lu Zhao's tone sounded like he was in a good mood, each word laced with a hint of amusement. "Oh." I didn't know how to respond, so I just quietly said thank you and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning. When I closed my eyes, all I could think about were the 7 houses I had hoped for, now slipping away. What a mess. I had asked the doctor at the infirmary, and with my sprained ankle, if I wanted to play basketball again, I'd need to rest for at least a month. Lu Zhao's offer to trade basketball practice for house square footage was just a whim on his part. He was a rich second-generation kid, after all. I understood. When he was in the mood, he could casually toss away a sports car like it was nothing. But a month from now, he might be completely bored of this game. Just thinking about my imaginary 7 houses vanishing into thin air made my heart ache so much I couldn't sleep. When I finally drifted off, even my dreams were about buying houses. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the urgent ringing of my phone. The caller ID showed Lu Zhao. Lu Zhao? My sleepiness vanished, and I sat up immediately, pressing the answer button. Lu Zhao's voice came through the receiver. Awake yet? Did he even need to ask? But his voice was a bit hoarse, carrying the uniquely sexy tone of someone who had just woken up. In a hazy moment, I almost thought I had gone back to my previous life, that we were lying in our double bed, and all I had to do was roll over to snuggle into his arms. Blinking, I snapped out of it, grabbed the glass of water from my bedside table, took a sip, and asked, "What's up?" Lu Zhao answered succinctly, "Get up, we're going to buy a house." I thought I misheard. "What? Today?" Lu Zhao seemed unusually patient, repeating himself once more. I sat there, dumbfounded, unable to believe it. "You want to buy a house?" "I'm not buying. I'm lending you the money so you can buy." I froze. Lu Zhao was proactively offering to lend me money to buy a house? A wave of intense joy surged through me. I jumped out of bed, gripping the phone tightly. Really? What do I need to do? There is something. I knew it. I immediately became wary. Getting a rich second-generation kid to willingly lend money definitely wasn't simple. After thinking for 2 seconds, he spoke up. "Help me have a child." I was completely stunned. It took me a long moment to stammer. "Lu Zhao, faking a pregnancy is illegal?" Lu Zhao burst out laughing. "What are you thinking? You don't actually have to get pregnant. Just put on an act. Pretend you're carrying my child." I stayed silent for a few seconds before cautiously asking, "Act for who?" "My parents." Though I didn't know what Lu Zhao was up to, I breathed a sigh of relief. In my previous life, his parents treated me like their own daughter. They were kind and approachable, not intimidating at all. Thinking about the chance to buy another house, I gritted my teeth and agreed. Lu Zhao didn't seem surprised by my reaction and immediately set a meeting place. I thought he wanted to meet to discuss the plan, but instead, he took me straight to his father's company. Good heavens, going straight to the main stage without a rehearsal! I was a bit nervous, but since I was already in deep, I had to go along with it. Lu Zhao's father was nothing like he was in my previous life. Back then, he was the owner of a small diner, always wearing an apron, smiling warmly, and very approachable. Now, seeing him in a suit sitting upright in a luxurious office, I couldn't quite adjust. At that moment, he was about to sign a contract with a business partner. Lu Zhao pulled me over and got straight to the point. "Dad, don't sign the contract. This is my girlfriend, Shen Yan. She's pregnant." His father froze, and I was so nervous I nearly fainted. The atmosphere in the room instantly became tense. A few seconds later, his father came to his senses, smiled and nodded at me, then turned to his son. "We'll talk about this later. I'm signing a contract now. You two go back first." No, Lu Zhao didn't budge, even delivering a bombshell. "If you sign that contract today, I'll take her to get an abortion right now." His father's face immediately turned extremely ugly. I bit my lip, terrified by Lu Zhao's resolute attitude. What was this guy doing? I knew it. Money doesn't come easy. The tension in the room was palpable, but in the end, his father relented. He sighed and turned to his partner with an apology. "I've failed to discipline my son, making a fool of myself in front of you. How about we meet again tomorrow to discuss further?" The other party was understanding and left shortly after. Soon, only the three of us remained in the office. Lu Zhao's father took a deep breath and looked straight at his son. "Speak. What are you up to now?" Lu Zhao sat on the edge of the desk, looking relaxed, even pouring himself a cup of tea. "The baby thing is fake." "Yes," I figured. His father accepted it far too calmly, without even a word of reprimand. I stood to the side, my jaw dropping. This father and son duo's way of communicating was too bizarre. Lu Zhao took a sip of tea, his eyes serious as he looked at his father. "That company has issues. If you cooperate with them, even a small mistake could drag our company down into bankruptcy." His father's expression darkened, staring at his son for a long time. Aito observed as well. I had to admit, he was indeed a shrewd businessman. If it were my father, he would have probably scolded me until I ran for my life. But Lu Zhao's father didn't treat him like a child. Instead, he regarded him as a grown man, seriously considering his words. Even though at this moment, Lu Zhao was still just a third-year university student. Reason? Lu Zhao set down his teacup, calmly saying, "Give me 2 days. I'll find enough evidence to show you. But for these 2 days, no matter what, you can't sign the contract." The father and son locked eyes for a long time. Finally, his father nodded. "Fine." I stood there, inwardly shocked. Where was Lu Zhao getting this evidence? He was just a third-year student. Wait a minute. I recalled what he had just said. He mentioned that if his father signed the contract, the company could go bankrupt. In that moment, a thought flashed through my mind. I remembered how Lu Zhao had suddenly stepped up to defend me. I remembered his words, as if he already knew what would happen. Could it be? Had Lu Zhao also traveled back in time? My heart raced. After leaving his father's company, I softly asked, "Lu Zhao, am I pretty?" This was a little secret between us from my previous life. Every time I asked him this, he would kiss me. But the familiar kiss didn't come. Instead, Lu Zhao looked me up and down carefully, then smirked and said 2 words, "Not bad." He was much taller than me, and at that moment, he looked down at me. Perhaps he was in a good mood after stopping his father from signing the contract, as there was still a hint of amusement in his eyes. Those 2 words, "not bad," hit me hard. And in that moment, I completely dismissed my earlier suspicion. The Lu Zhao from my previous life wouldn't have answered like that. He would have looked at me intently and told me I was the most beautiful in his heart. He would have, on drunken nights, lifted my face and whispered, "Marrying you is the greatest blessing of my life." Not this infuriating guy standing in front of me now. 2 days later, Lu Zhao actually produced a series of investigation results and placed them on his father's desk. His father immediately sent people to verify the information, and in the end, decisively canceled the partnership. But Lu Zhao didn't seem to plan on stopping there. Before his father officially canceled the deal, Lu Zhao secretly leaked information about the partnership, making it look like an internal leak, and accidentally let a rival company find out. Sure enough, on the same day his father canceled the deal, the rival company swooped in and signed the contract with the other party. When I was in a relationship with Lu Zhao, he had already transferred a large sum of money to me. I offered to write an IOU, but he refused. Lu Zhao glanced at me, a playful glint in his eyes. "No need. If you try to run off with the money, I have 100 ways to find you." Though he said that, I insisted on writing an IOU. After all, we weren't officially a couple yet, so it was better to keep things formal. Once the IOU was written, Lu Zhao's money was in my account. The amount was enough for me to buy a 2-bedroom apartment outright, in the same complex as the one Lu Zhao had bought earlier, the one whose prices would skyrocket in 10 years. After signing the contract and stepping outside, I looked up at the sky. For the first time in my life, I felt the sky was so blue, the clouds so white. The world was beautiful. Calculating carefully, as long as I followed the trajectory of my previous life and one Luzhou over, I would have 4 houses in Beijing and become a proper, small-time landlord. I raised my hand, counting on my fingers, seeing a bright and dazzling future. But there were still 2 months left before the housing restriction policy would be enacted. If I didn't seize the chance to buy another house in these 2 months, wouldn't it be such a waste? So I looked up at Luzhou and started probing. Luzhou, how about you buy another house? Luzhou spread his hands, completely straightforward. I'm out of money. How about, I continued to coax, you sell that sports car and buy another house? Surprisingly, this time Luzhou didn't react as strongly as before. He just raised an eyebrow and asked, don't you think that car is pretty cool? It is cool, but it won't appreciate in value. To convince him, I started bluffing, mixing truth with fiction. I heard some insider info. 2 months from now, there'll be a housing purchase restriction policy. You'll need to meet certain conditions to buy, and there'll be limits on how many you can purchase. Once this policy comes out, housing prices will explode in the next few years. Buying now is a huge profit. I didn't actually expect much, since the young Luzhou was an incredibly tough nut to crack. No matter how I pushed or tempted him, he remained as steady as a mountain. But as soon as I finished speaking, Luzhou suddenly looked down at me. You really want me to buy a house? I nodded eagerly, like a woodpecker. I can buy, he said with a slight smile, but you have to pursue me first. The hope that had just sparked was instantly extinguished. Pursuing the young Luzhou seemed even harder than buying a house, but with the opportunity right in front of me, I couldn't help but waver. Fine, I gritted my teeth and agreed, but you have to go easy on me. I got tanned and sprains my ankle for you, so lower the difficulty a bit, okay? Luzhou laughed. Don't worry, I'm easy to pursue. Only a ghost would believe that. That night, I stayed up the entire night, using my knowledge of Luzhou from my previous life to devise a plan called Operation Conquer Luzhou. Step 1. Pretend to be drunk. Use the opportunity to get closer. In my previous life, Luzhou was always helpless whenever I got drunk. So, after telling my parents I'd be staying at a female colleague's place for the night, I went to a small bar near Luzhou's university and deliberately got myself to about 7/10 drunk. They say a man at 7/10 drunk can act until he cries. A woman at 7/10 drunk can deceive until hearts break. After all, I had the mindset of someone in her 30s. Could I really not handle this ex-boyfriend who hadn't even graduated college yet? Calling him an ex-boyfriend wasn't wrong, since I didn't know what else to call this younger version of my fiancé. Once I felt I was sufficiently drunk, I immediately called Luzhou. The next second, his voice came through the phone. I softened my voice, speaking gently, Luzhou, my head hurts so much. There was a 2-second silence on the other end. You've been drinking? I looked up at the bar's sign and slowly continued. I'm at Li Hongjiang Sichuan restaurant. Another 2 seconds of silence. Then Luzhou's low voice said, Got it. He hung up abruptly. Sitting nearby, the bar owner looked at me hesitantly, finally unable to hold back. Miss, this place is called Hongjiang Sichuan Restaurant, not Li Hongjiang. But it seemed I had overestimated my alcohol tolerance. I wasn't just 7/10 drunk, I was completely tipsy. Hearing the owner, I frowned. Li isn't here? If there's no Li, then you should just live well with your wife. With that, I reached into my bag, pulled out 2 bills, stacked them together, stared at them for a long moment, and handed them to the owner. Here, 10 RMB, no need for change. Then I stumbled out of the bar, heading to the school gate to wait for Luzhou. Behind me, the bar owner looked down at the 2 10 RMB bills in his hand, nearly crying. I ran into Luzhou right at the school gate. He was holding a bottle of water, walking quickly, not even noticing me. The moment he passed by, I reached out to grab him. My fingers brushed the edge of his shirt, but missed. I fell straight to the ground. Immediately, someone caught me, and I fell into a familiar embrace. It was Luzhou. My head spun, and I instinctively nestled deeper into his arms. His body stiffened slightly, but he quickly relaxed. He let out a soft sigh, his arms tightening around me, his warm voice murmuring in my ear, "I really don't know what to do with you." His tone was gentle, full of indulgence. In a hazy moment, I truly thought I had gone back to the past. I wrapped my arms around his neck, whispering with regret, "Lu Zhao, when will you remember me?" He chuckled softly, his breath warm against my ear. "I remember now." With that, he helped me up. Not toward the school, but to a hotel nearby. He brought me into a room. I was dazed from the alcohol, a bit delirious, and softly asked, "Are you old enough yet?" Lu Zhao laughed. "I'm in university, not high school." Oh, right. So the alcohol numbed my senses. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, slowly realizing something. "So, you're Lu Zhao?" No, that's not right. Whether he traveled back or not, he was still Lu Zhao. I took a deep breath, rephrasing my question, but as I looked into those familiar eyes, my voice trembled. "So, you traveled back too?" "Yes." He sat down beside me, effortlessly pulling me into his arms, "Just a bit later than you." "When?" "The morning after you were slandered." No wonder. I hadn't expected that a young Lu Zhao who always hated trouble would suddenly change so drastically and take my side. But thinking about it, I felt a bit disappointed. "Lu Zhao, when you were younger, did you really not like me at all? If that's the case, doesn't that mean in our previous life, you only fell for me because I showed up at the right time?" Lu Zhao ruffled my hair, smiling softly. "Of course not." He took out his phone. "This is what I found on my phone after I traveled back." In 2010, Lu Zhao's phone was an iPhone 4. In his notes, I saw a few scattered diary entries. Line after line, they were all about me. For example, our first meeting on the basketball court, the time at the private cinema, or when he softened and agreed to the deal of 1 hour of practice for 5 square meters of property. Or the time I sprained my ankle, beneath his calm facade were waves of worry and heartache. I was so drunk my vision blurred, but I squinted to read every word. Then I burst out laughing. I knew it. Whether he was a young man or a mature adult, Lu Zhao would always fall for me. And of course, so would I. I still had so many questions I hadn't asked, but thinking about it, there was no rush. Right now, I stared at Lu Zhao's face, my gaze slowly drifting downward. Lu Zhao. I licked my lips, calling his name softly, as expected of my lover of many years. He understood immediately. "Isn't this a bit inappropriate?" He hesitated, but I pounced, pinning him down. "The room's already booked, and you're saying this now?" Lu Zhao put up a token resistance twice, then gave in. Amid our entanglement, he chuckled softly. "To be able to redo life and meet you earlier, it's really wonderful." But I wasn't in the mood for such romantic words. I was completely immersed in the moment, with only one thought in my mind. A gentle, mature lover in a youthful, strong body. Absolute perfection. The third-year university student, Lu Zhao, so youthful. The next morning, I woke up in Lu Zhao's arms. It had been a while since we were together, and last night had been particularly wild. I rummaged through the mess for my clothes, but before I could put them on, Lu Zhao wrapped me in a blanket. He rested his chin on top of my head, his voice low and gentle. "Let's talk. Don't you have a lot of questions for me?" I did have a lot of questions. I obediently snuggled into his arms, asking one by one, "Why are you a rich second-generation kid now?" When I was in university, my dad's company was already doing well, and our family was quite wealthy. But in my third year, during a partnership deal, my dad was scammed by the other party, who ran off with the money. The company lacked the capital to keep going, and on top of that, a rival sabotaged our remaining contracts. In the end, the company went bankrupt. We sold the house, the cars, everything, and still had a huge debt. Starting from university, I had to work part-time jobs to make money. My dad lost all his drive and didn't want to rebuild his career, so he and my mom opened a small diner to get by. So that's how it was. So, I looked up at him. Your personality changed after that. After all, the young Lu Zhao and the one I met in my previous life had completely different personalities. Lu Zhao nodded slightly. The sudden collapse of my family dragged me from the clouds to the mud. Back then, we were drowning in debt. I went through a lot of hardships and saw the true nature of society and people. After experiencing so much, my personality gradually changed. He smiled faintly. People, when they're young, are always sharp and proud, but the more they go through, the more those edges get smoothed out. I didn't know what to say. only feeling a pang of heartache, and in the end, I just hugged him tightly. Lu Jiao laughed, his hand gently stroking my hair. Next question? Did you also travel back because of the elevator accident? Yes. So when you woke up, it was the morning after I got slandered? Exactly. He lazily played with my hair, his voice slow. When I woke up, I found myself back 12 years in the past, and my life had changed a bit. You appeared a few years earlier, and you were trying so hard to get me to buy houses. It took me a whole day to process that reality, and then that evening, I saw all the slander about you online. So, my thoughts became clearer, and I grasped a key point. You clearly traveled back at that point. Why didn't you tell me right away? At that, Lu Jiao laughed. Because in our previous life, I was the one who pursued you. After traveling back, I wanted to experience what it felt like to be pursued by you. I nestled into his arms, asking softly, "So, are you satisfied?" Yes. His strong hand rested on my waist, measuring it. When you were younger, your waist was much slimmer. That morning, Lu Jiao got a call. The rival company to his father's had gone bankrupt. The reason was the same as in our previous life. The partner they collaborated with ran off with the money, plunging the company into a severe financial crisis. But unlike our previous life, this time, thanks to Lu Jiao's behind-the-scenes maneuvering, the rival company's collapse happened even faster than his father's company had in the past. I was overjoyed. So your dad's company doesn't have to go bankrupt anymore, right? Yes. So I'm still a rich second-generation kid, right? Yes. I grinned like a fool. Then we have money to buy houses before the restriction policy comes into effect. Lu Jiao laughed, ruffling my hair with an indulgent tone. Silly. Even if we don't buy houses, I can still give you a good life. No way. I shook my head vigorously, sticking to my original goal. Look, I have 3 houses and you have 1. If you buy 6 more, by the time we get married, we'll have a total of 10 houses in Beijing. Our life will be so great then. I spoke with immense pride, as if I had already become the small-time landlord Shenyan. But Lu Jiao froze. He asked, "What?" I paused, then repeated, 10 houses in Beijing, right? Not that. I thought for a moment, then tentatively said, "When we get married?" My heart sank. Could it be that after becoming a rich second-generation kid again, Lu Jiao didn't want to marry me anymore? After all, with his current wealth and looks, there were plenty of better girls for him to choose from. But before I could feel sad for long, he pulled me off the bed. He grabbed my clothes and tossed them at me, but his aim was off, and they landed right on my head. I quietly pulled the bra off my head and looked up at him. "What's the rush?" "Yes." Lu Jiao quickly got dressed, glancing at his watch. "The Civil Affairs Bureau opens at 9. "Huh?" He finished dressing, came over to help me put my clothes on, and said casually, "What's with the huh? In our previous life, we didn't get to register our marriage. Now's the perfect time to do it." "But?" I sat there, dazed, letting him dress me. "Are you even old enough now?" Once he was done, he crouched in front of me, his expression serious. "I just turned 22. I can register to get married. But we haven't even met each other's parents yet?" Lu Jiao froze. "Oh, right. In our previous life, we got along wonderfully with both sets of parents. We had set a wedding date and even agreed to register our marriage on May 21st, the following year. But then the time travel incident happened. In this life, we hadn't even formally met each other's parents yet. After calming down, Lu Jiao sat on the bed, lit a cigarette, and called both sets of parents. 3 days. Lu Jiao was terrifying. In just 3 days, he convinced all the parents, and 3 days later, we officially registered our marriage. Stepping out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I still hadn't fully processed it. In the little red marriage certificate, both Lu Jiao and I were smiling brightly. The 2 faces in the photo were still so young. Suddenly, I felt that the heavens had truly favored us. I had returned to the very day I stubbornly refused my parents' offer to buy a house in my previous life. And Lu Jiao had returned to the day before his father signed the contract that led to their bankruptcy. We had the chance to change our fates. We had rewritten history, fixing all our past mistakes. And most importantly, we had met each other earlier. The love between us hadn't changed. In fact, it had grown even deeper and more steadfast. The marriage certificate we never got in our previous life was now in my hands. I held the little red book tightly, staring at it for a long time, then looked up, a bit dazed. "So, what do we do now?" Lu Zhao opened his phone to check. There was still 1 month left before the housing restriction policy would be enacted. He smiled, leaning down to whisper in my ear, "Buy houses." And so, I really became a small-time landlord with 10 houses in Beijing. Lu Zhao had 2, and I had 8. Life was like a dream. After the housing restriction policy took effect, Lu Zhao started expanding his investments. He bought Mutai stocks, invested in gold. After all, his greatest hobby was using information asymmetry to make money, riding the first wave of investment opportunities. And the money he earned, I used it all to buy houses in cities that hadn't yet imposed restrictions but would see explosive price growth in the future. We lived like that, enjoying life until I got pregnant. At the checkup, the doctor told me I was having twins. That evening, Lu Zhao and I sat on the balcony, stargazing. I looked at the stars while he only looked at me. "Lu Zhao," I said, taking his hand, "do you think our life can stay like this forever? What if we wake up one day and go back to the past again? It won't happen." His warm hand enveloped mine. Before, I used to worry about that too, afraid that everything was just a dream, that I'd wake up and it would all be gone. But today, he moved his hand, gently placing it on my belly. Until our babies came along, Yan Yan. His chin rested on top of my head, his voice full of warmth. "They're the gift the heavens gave us this time. Everything is getting better and better." He kissed my forehead softly. "I think the reason the heavens gave us this chance to redo our lives was to fix the regrets we had." I squeezed his hand tightly. Yes. In this life, we had fixed all the regrets of our past, changed our fates, and for the first time, we had children of our own. So we had to cherish this life. We couldn't let the heavens' gift of a second chance go to waste. I gently rubbed my belly, thinking about officially becoming a mother in 10 months, and couldn't help but feel excited. "Lu Zhao, how about you invest some more and we buy a house for each of our kids?" "All right,